Hey yo, what's good y'all? It's Stinger, developer of multiple biohazards, and today I'm going to be showing each and every one of you how you can make some vocal sample / vocal chop Dom CORLEO type beats. And you know how we do it here, no dilly-dallying, no hoopla in the intro, and with that being said, the beat that we're going to be going over today sounds a little something like this. Now, if you couldn't notice from the preview, the vocal sample that I used is I Knew You Were Trouble by Taylor Swift. But there's a multitude of different sources that you could pull from to get these vocal chops. You could do pre-made vocal chops. My personal favorites are from Cymatics or from Arcade. You could pull from a song like I did here, or what I've been doing recently is pulling from vocal stems. And this only really works if you have a large array of samples in your library. But what I do is I go into my library and I type in vocal. And as you can see, there's a bunch of different cymatic stems from their loops that contain vocals. So it's essentially just repurposing those vocals. So here's what our vocals sound like unchopped with just some few basic effects like reverb and EQ. And also a big thing to keep in mind with these vocals is typically you'll want them to be pitched up in some way. So I have these pitched up by 200 cents, nothing crazy, but it's gonna add that high pitched quality. So now that I've shown you where to get the vocal samples from, as well as pitching them, I'm gonna go over the effects to give it that signature vocal chop sound. And for this effect, I only use two plugins. The first of which is Shaperbox. And all I have is a LFO on the time shaper. Essentially, if you're a chronic FL Studio user like me, this is essentially just gross beat right here. And all this is doing is remapping the time in certain places according to the LFO's input. This is basically the meat of our chop. You want to have some kind of time remapping, whether it be through Grossbeat or Shaperbox or some other plugin. And not to dwell on this effect for too long, but the preset that I'm using is under Stutter 2, and it's the Repeat 1, 2, and 3 preset. Now the second effect plugin is pretty optional, but it gives the chop a lot of character, and that is Portal. And I just have it on a custom reverse preset that I made, but you could browse the stretch and smear presets, the delay presets, the vocals presets, and you'll find something that'll fit your vocal chop. So now with those effects enabled, this is what our vocal chop sounds like. So as you can tell, we already have a great basis for the rest of our beat. And because of that, we only have one other melodic component. And that's just going to be this background pad from Diva, which is the BS Beauty pad. And all I did for this is I looked up the chords for I Knew You Were Trouble by Taylor Swift, transposed them to match my key, and added in some extra notes just to make the melody a little bit more interesting. And I throw in a component like this just to fill in the melody a little bit more, because the vocal chops are taking up a lot of high to mid-range frequencies, whereas this background pad is playing in a lower octave and is going to take up some low mid to low frequencies. And also you want to make sure for these kind of beats your background melody is pretty simple, because you want your vocal chops to be the main center point of your melody. So with that being said, this is what the background pad sounds like. Alright, so now that we've gone over all components of the melody, let's go over the drums. The first component that we're going to cover is the 808s. And for these, you want to have low attack 808s, meaning that they're not super punchy. And then depending on your stylistic preferences in the 808 that you're using, you want them to be clipping. Now, I just have the 808s playing a relatively simple pattern following the root note, not really much to go over in terms of the pattern. But like I said, in the mixing, I have it clipping at around 3 decibels. And I also have on a fruity fast distortion using the B panel with the mix level at around 15%. So with that being said, this is what the 808 sounds like. The next portion, and arguably the most important portion of the drums, is going to be the hi-hats. And for these type of beats, the hi-hats are very important because they provide a very signature type of bounce. As you can see, I am not playing any type of two-step hi-hat pattern. It is pretty essential for these kind of beats for the hi-hats to be very spaced out. Having some dead space in your hi-hats is a surefire way to create some bounce. And also, don't be afraid to make use of rolls, triplet fills, pitch variation, all that kind of stuff. So now that I've covered the key components of the hi-hat pattern, this is what it sounds like. Alright, so now we're going to go over some additional drum components, which are less important, but still pretty important. The first of which is going to be some kind of counter snare. And yet again, you're going to hear this term when describing this beat, but this counter snare assists in creating more bounce in the drums. And I recommend putting your counter snares on the off beats, meaning they're not hitting on the 1, 2, 3, 4. They're hitting on the 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And similarly with the hi-hats, don't be afraid to play around with rolls. So that being said, this is what our counter snare pattern sounds like. And then the next two components of the drums are pretty simple. There's not really much to go over in terms of them, but I just threw down a cymbal to make the drums a little bit more bright, as well as a clap. So just to recap the drums, you're going to want a low attack 808 playing a relatively simple pattern. You're going to want spaced out hi-hats to provide some bounce in your beat. You're going to want a counter snare to emphasize that bounce. And then you can throw in some additional components like cymbals or open hats to provide some brightness in your drums. So with that being said, this is what they sound like all together. And then the final thing that I want to briefly cover in terms of this beat is going to be the intro. So as you can see for the intro, I have a couple automation clips. I have two which are automating the shaper box and the portal on our vocal chop. And then the last one is automating our reverb. So the shaper box and the portal automation clips are exactly the same. And they start with the mix at 0 up until the 8th bar where the mix goes up to 100%. This is just to kind of give the listener a sneak peek of the vocal chop before the chorus hits. And then our reverb is at 100 in terms of the mix level for the entire intro, but then stoops down at the 8th bar when our chorus is about to start. And then additionally, I threw in a riser just to make that transition a little bit more smooth. So with that being said, this is what our intro leading into the chorus sounds like altogether. Alright, so that's going to pretty much cover how to make vocal chops / sample beats in the style of Dom CORLEO. I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial and learned something new. If you have any questions, please feel free to throw them in the comments down below and I will do my absolute best to answer them. Also, consider checking out my Patreon where I post the FLPs to all of my beats in all of my videos, including this one. And as well as that, you also get access to one of my sound kits per month. And finally, consider subscribing as I post one tutorial a week and anywhere from 1 to 2 sound kits a month. Other than that, it's going to be it. Peace.